All right, today we are diving into a book that basically turned modern thinking on its head, Freakonomics. The whole idea was to look at the hidden side of, well, everything, by using the tools of economics in places you would never, ever expect. It gets weird, it gets interesting, so let's get into it.
And we're going to start with a question that sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke, right? I mean, seriously, a school teacher in Chicago and a sumo wrestler in Japan, what could they possibly have in common? Well, the answer isn't a punchline. It's actually a peek into the secret operating system that's running the world right under our noses. And that's really the heart of this book. If morality is how we wish the world worked, economics shows us how it actually works.
So our first big reveal is all about one of the most powerful, invisible forces out there. It's a force that guides almost every decision we make, whether we realize it or not. We're talking about incentives.
So, what is an incentive? It's just a fancy word for a reason to do something. You've got economic ones, like a bonus at work. You've got social ones, like not wanting people to think you're a jerk for littering. And you have moral ones. You know, that little voice in your head that tells you to return a wallet you found because it's the right thing to do. We're all being pushed and pulled by these three things all the time. But here's the twist. The dark side of incentives is that as soon as you create a system with really high stakes, you also create a massive incentive to cheat that system. And when the pressure gets high enough, it's pretty shocking who decides to bend the rules.
Which brings us right back to our bizarre puzzle. Teachers, the very symbols of integrity, and sumo wrestlers, these icons of honor and tradition. The book's crazy argument is that they are basically the same, because they both work in these pressure cooker worlds where one tiny outcome can make or break their entire future.
So let's go to Chicago in the 90s. The city introduces high-stakes testing. Now all of a sudden, a teacher's job, their pay, their promotions, it all comes down to how the third graders fill in bubbles on a test. The pressure on these teachers was just immense. So what do you think happened? Well, the authors of Freakonomics got their hands on all the data, every single test answer, and they built an algorithm to sniff out cheating. And the results were insane. In about 5% of classrooms every single year, the data showed clear as day evidence that the teacher was the one cheating.
Okay, now let's jump over to Japan. A sumo wrestler's entire life, his rank, his pay, his lifestyle, boils down to a 15-day tournament. If he gets at least 8 wins, his rank goes up. 7 wins or less, and it goes down. So that 8th win? It's literally the difference between success and failure. And this is where the data gets really suspicious. On the final day of the tournament, you have a wrestler who's 7-7, desperate for that one last win. He's fighting a guy who is 8-6, who is totally safe. Statistically, it should be a coin flip, right? A 50-50 shot. But the data shows the desperate guy wins almost 80% of the time. The numbers are screaming that a deal is being made in the ring. Let me win today and I'll owe you one later.
So, if incentives are the motive for the crime, then our next big reveal is all about the weapon of choice: information. Okay, I'll admit, this might be the most shocking comparison in the entire book. A violent hate group and the person who helps you buy a house. What in the world do they have in common? It's simple, and it's kind of chilling. They both get their power by hoarding secrets. The fancy term for this is information asymmetry. But all it really means is that one person in a deal knows a lot more than the other person. And that gap, that space between what they know and what you don't, that's where they get their power. So back in the 1940s, the power of the KKK wasn't just in their violence. It was in their mystery. They had all these secret codes, weird titles, and spooky rituals. All that secrecy made them seem way more powerful and scary than they actually were. That is, until one man decided to tear it all down.
And this is where the story takes a turn for the truly bizarre. This guy, Stetson Kennedy, didn't go to the newspapers. He went to the producers of the Superman radio show. And soon, all across America, kids were playing in their backyards using the KKK's top secret passwords. They turned terror into a punchline. The KKK's power just crumbled, not because of force, but because they became a joke.
So how does this apply to your real estate agent? Well, think about it. Your incentive is to get the absolute highest price for your house. But your agent's incentive is to make a commission fast. See, an extra 10 grand for you might only be another $150 for them. It's barely worth their time. Their real goal is to close the deal and move on to the next one.
And this is how they use their information advantage. The words in a real estate listing are basically a secret code. The data shows that when listings use specific, concrete words like granite, maple, or state-of-the-art, the houses sell for more. But when you see vague, fluffy words like fantastic or charming or spacious, that's code for let's make a deal.
Okay, final reveal. We've talked about the motives and the weapons. Now we're going to see how looking at the raw numbers can absolutely demolish the stories we all think are true, what people call conventional wisdom.
Take the early 1990s. All the experts were freaking out. They were predicting this terrifying crime wave of teenage super predators. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Crime didn't just go down a little. It fell off a cliff. The experts weren't just wrong, they were spectacularly wrong.
So of course, everybody wanted to take credit. Oh, it was the great economy. No, it was our new gun laws. It was our brilliant new policing strategies. And these stories sounded good. They felt right, and everyone just kind of started repeating them. But when the authors of Freakonomics actually looked at the data, none of those explanations held up.
Now, this is by far the most controversial idea in the entire book. The data pointed to something that happened decades earlier, something nobody wanted to connect to crime. In 1973, Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. The book's argument is that over the next decade, millions of unwanted children, who would have been born into poverty or to single mothers, the very factors most highly correlated with crime, were simply never born. Fast forward about 20 years, right when that generation would have been hitting their peak crime-committing age, the crime rate plummeted.
And this really drives the whole point home. The data can show us these incredibly powerful and often uncomfortable truths that completely contradict the simple, feel-good stories we like to tell ourselves. Sometimes the biggest effects have the most hidden causes.
So, to wrap it all up, what have we learned? 3 big things. 1. Incentives run the world. If you want to know why something is happening, follow the incentives. 2. Information is power. Always be asking yourself who knows what and why they might not be telling you everything. And 3. Be skeptical. The data usually tells a much more interesting and much stranger story than the official one.
Really, what Freakonomics gives you is a new lens. It's a toolkit for looking at the world and seeing the hidden connections, the secret motivations that are really pulling the strings. So the challenge is, now that you know how to look, what are you going to find?